All right. So thanks for joining me on a Tuesday evening. I will try to make this as painless as possible, and I'll do my best to address any of the questions. Feel free to send those over to Brittany, and we'll answer them as we go along instead of trying to save them till the end. So what we're going to focus on this evening for the next 45 minutes or so is this journey we've been on for the past decade or so of understanding, number one, understanding biochar, but then applying it to urban forest and arboriculture and trying to figure out, does it have applications in our industry or not, and in what circumstances. And we still have a lot of questions, but we have more answers than we've ever had. And for us in Bartlett, I know many of you and other companies use biochar on a routine basis, a daily basis, to improve soil health and then ultimately tree performance. So we could do an entire session on just biochar and the characteristics therein, and then a whole nother session on tree effects. We're going to try to merge the two of those together into 45 minutes or so, allowing time for questions. So it's going to be a pretty high level overview of things we've learned. So yeah, happy to have any further discussions anybody wants to have afterwards, but let's go ahead and get through here. If you're unfamiliar with biochar, this is what it looks like on this slide. It essentially looks like charcoal, because that's exactly what it is charcoal. We'll get into sort of the nuances of the difference in this and cooking charcoals and the like. But when we first started looking at biochar, probably around 2009, 2010, we were like, yeah, this comes in a long line of snake oils in the industry, from things you see in gardening magazines and Jerry Baker and his tobacco juice and everything else that comes through our industry that make outrageous claims. And we kind of thought, well, this would be another one of those, but let's take a look at it. So we did. But before we get too far into it, let's get this established right from the get-go, that biochar is not a silver bullet. It's not a cure-all. There's no panacea here. It's not going to magically excavate your root collar from being buried too deep. It's not going to do anything like that. It is what it is, and nothing more, nothing less. So it's not a magical elixir here. And as with most things that we do, there are a lot of factors at work here. There's no blanket statement we can make about biochar that it's always going to do this or it's always going to do that. It like many of the things we do, the answer to many of the questions are, it depends. Depends on soil conditions, the species that we're growing it in, the climate, the situation in which we're growing that tree species. And then we deal with some pretty large, amazing, fascinating organisms in our industry. And it takes time to learn about many of the factors that affect performance. So the decade or so we've been working with biochar, we can draw some short-term conclusions from that, but a decade is not very long in terms of a tree lifespan. So we have to put that in context. Everything we know, everything we're going to talk about now is in a short time frame. We don't know what's going to happen in the long term, which for me is good. That means job security. So I'm on board with that. And then again, it's not a silver bullet. This is not a one and done sort of treatment. This has to be integrated with other soil care programs, plant health care treatments, which are going to vary by species and location. So with all that preamble, let's jump into biochar and what we do know about it. So the renewed interest in biochar came from these soils in the Amazon River basin, and the native populations there had this Portuguese term called terra preta, or black earth, or dark earth. And these soils in the Amazon River basin, these are tropical soils where it's warm all the time. So microorganisms are constantly degrading the organic component in those soils, right? So they're highly weathered, highly leached soils that honestly have pretty poor performance. I know for me, I tend to think, oh, the river basin, tropical forest environment, those must be really rich soils. Well, it's just the opposite. They're pretty poor soils, again, because of the warm temperatures year round, very little organic matter. But the archaeologists in these areas were stumbling upon this terra preta soil, this dark earth soil, rich, productive. I don't know how the colors are coming through on the slide, but if you look at the upper profiles in this soil pit, they're deep, fertile, rich, black soils, look like you'd find in the Midwest of the United States. But what's really exciting about this is that these civilizations collapsed, hundreds of years ago. So centuries now have gone by. No one's been out there composting or amending these soils. So whatever they did had this sense of permanency to it. So over hundreds of years, these soils have had high organic matter levels, high available nutrient status in these soils, and no one's been doing anything to them because no one's lived there. What they found is the way they achieved this was through the amendment of soils with charcoal. And this is something like what it would look like, not an OSHA approved working environment here. This would never fly in the state of Georgia, but they would have these cool burns going on in the fields where, as a way of fertilizing and amending the soils, they go down to the river basin, drag up lush, wet, tropical foliage, bring it back to the fields and place it on these cool burns. They're not actually burns. It is the exclusion of oxygen under hot environments that creates charcoal. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of that in a minute. But if you have a flame, if you have an actual fire, the resulting residual matter is ash. If you exclude oxygen by bringing wet, succulent foliage and placing over these cool burns, you exclude oxygen, and the thermal processes still break down that plant material, but the resulting matter is a charcoal as opposed to an ash. This is something like it would look like, again, bringing this wet succulent plant material as a way of returning nutrients to the soil, but also creating this charcoal product as a byproduct of this agricultural practice. So the resulting charcoal from these types of practices is, the geek speak, is recalcitrant. It doesn't break down in the soil. So this is a graphic here from Johannes Lehmann, who's a researcher at Cornell University in New York, and he's one of the world's authorities on biochar. He's a big fish in a really small pond because there aren't many authorities on biochar yet. But this graphic sort of explains that same principle, where if we look at biochar, I hope my mouse shows up here. Let me see if I can do the fancy laser pointer here. So if we start day one with 100% of the carbon in whatever biomass we're making biochar from, and in this case, let's just speak about wood chips, because we're all hopefully on this call pretty familiar with wood chips. So let's say we start out with wood chips as our feedstock for the biochar. And day one, we have 100% of the carbon that is in that wood chip. Well, we know if we spread wood chips on the soil surface as mulch, what do? They break down. We love that because it's returning the carbon to the soil, building that A horizon, all the good things we know that it does. But within a matter of a few years, it's broken down. It's done its job. It's returned the organic matter to the soil, and we better be replenishing that pretty frequently. Well, if we take that same wood chip and we run it through this process called pyrolysis, which I'll describe in a little more detail, is the heating of this biomass with the exclusion of oxygen. There's several different gizmos that allow you to do that. I'll show you a crude one here in a bit. We break those chemical bonds, those tars, the resins, the volatile compounds that are in this wood chip. So we drive off about half the carbon in that wood chip in that process. But then look at what happens. The other remaining carbon that is in that biochar particle is stable. It doesn't break down. It's not broken down through microbial communities in the soil. And this flat line could continue out for decades or even centuries based on what we know from the Amazon River basin. All right, so once we take that, again, in this case, wood chip, doesn't have to be, and we pyrolyze it, the carbon that's left over, again, around half of the carbon that's left over is stable for decades or even centuries. Okay, so it's able to lock that carbon away. We can put that in the soil and do good things. We'll talk about more, but we know it doesn't break down. It's stable over time. So that's kind of cool. Well, if you don't believe me, you don't believe Cornell, believe the press, because they're always right and on point. So this top article was a few years ago in USA Today. They had a front page article about could chicken manure help curb climate change, and it profiled this chicken farmer in West Virginia who, was struggling to get rid of the manure, the waste from the chicken operation. And what he was able to do is get himself a biochar doohickey. So he was able to take the manure, the waste stream from his operation, run that through a pyrolysis unit, and create a biochar. But his angle was he was using the heat generated from the pyrolysis, the breaking of those chemical bonds, the production of the biochar to heat the houses instead of purchasing and burning propane. So that was his end game, was to not have to purchase and offset the use of propane for the heat energy. And then he had this sort of co-product, the biochar, that he could then sell to get local farmers. So that was a cool story. CNN had it as one of the 8 weird ways to save the earth. There's a biochar textbook. You can find it on YouTube, maybe even TikTok. I don't know. It's made the big time. And that's one of the cool things, like with this chicken farmer, is he was looking at a waste product, right? Something he's struggling to find a use for, struggling to find a beneficial way to use this waste product, and turned it into a net positive. And that's one of the real, I'd say, focal points of the whole biochar movement, the entire initiative within the biochar community, is let's focus on things that we struggle to find good uses for. And these, we do have the prerequisite of this being carbon-based materials, right? So a term I learned is corn stover. I always called it corn stalks. I grew up in Georgia and we just called them corn stalks, but the proper name is corn stover. So if you think about the millions of acres of corn that are in this country, what happens to the carbon in those corn stalks, right? We bundle them up and sell them for outrageous prices to decorate in the fall. But beyond that, we struggle to find uses. So what if we could lock away the potentially millions or billions of pounds of carbon that have built these corn stalks, and lock that away into an amendment that would be beneficial to the soil in the form of biochar? For us, wood chips, right? I mean, it's a product of our operations. We can find uses for it, mulch. But what if we could lock the carbon away on a permanent, as far as we're concerned, permanent timescale, at least centuries? That'd be really cool. So peanut shells, rice hulls, all these waste materials, carbon-based plant waste materials, what if we could turn that around and use those waste materials for good and produce biochar? So that's the overarching theme here. Is a lot of people have fears of, oh, we're going to start clear cutting forests to produce biochar. No, that's not a net gain. That's not on anyone's mind. Let's take waste materials and turn that into something good. So it's going to be a theme throughout, is not all biochar is created equal, right? We can't, you can't be guaranteed, and it will never be that one char is equal to another. And there's several different factors at work there. One of the factors, this is a pretty crude biochar production facility, but I'll just show you. This is wood chip matter here from a forestry operation. And those wood chips get conveyed up into this chamber, into this chute, into this doohickey. And I'll take a closer look at that here in a second for you. And the end result is this raw, fresh biochar material. Okay, that's a pretty unsophisticated operation. And so you can imagine that the resulting biochar from this operation would be perhaps quite a bit different than a more climate controlled or closely regulated pyrolysis unit. I keep calling it a doohickey, but a pyrolysis unit. So the unit with which it's made, the techniques with which it's made matters. But also this is pine wood chip from forestry operations. But what if we make it from hardwoods? What if we made it from oak? What if we made it from EAB killed ash? What about bamboo? Looking at harvesting invasive species to char. What if it's a mixed bag and we don't really know what species it is? Much like what comes out of most of our chip boxes. That's whatever we're pruning or removing that day. So these are all factors that play into biochar quality. Yeah, again, the equipment, the technique, you can see in this scenario here, there's no limitation on atmospheric air. So how much oxygen can or can't get into the process, that's going to affect the resulting amount of ash that is in the biochar. And the more ash you have in the biochar, the higher the pH is going to be, which for us in the Southeast might be a good thing. But if you take that same biochar and put it in the Midwest, where their pHs are 7 and 8, 9 even sometimes, it's not a good biochar. So I have to take in not only what it's made from, but the unit in which it's made, and all these factors, absorption, the size of pores that are in there. Again, we talked about the amount of ash that's there. All these factors come into play. And again, in the example for us in the Southeast, where we typically have more acidic soils, maybe not as much in the urban environment, a high pH biochar is going to be a good thing. You take that same biochar and you go to Chicago with it, and now that's a really bad biochar, because that's the last thing they need is more alkalinity in their soil. So just know that it's not all the same, and the same biochar in two different locations could be drastically different in the way it is applied. So what we'll do is from here, we'll look at what we know. That's a real short primer on biochar and where it comes from and how it's made. But let's take the approach I'm going to take is practical, right? There are a lot of academic researchers looking at biochar, answering sort of theoretical questions, but the research we do is more where the rubber meets the road. How can we use this practically in day-to-day arboriculture operations, and what can we expect from it? So that's what we're going to do. It's not going to be a lot of high-level nitty-gritty science here, more of things we've learned both scientifically and anecdotally on the application of biochar through the past decade or so. With that said, for those of you who read Arboriculture and Urban Forestry, the ISA Science Journal, back in May, if you want to know more about the science of biochar, all the work that's been done, one of my coworkers, Emma Schaefer, part of her PhD project is focused on biochar. And she and several others, including our own Dr. Glenn Percival, published this literature review with 46 papers that have all happened in the past decade, going through what we know about biochar and its effects on all these different factors of urban trees. So 2 ways you could look at it. You could be really interested in it and pick this up, or you could suffer from insomnia, and this could be a good fix for it. In this same issue of Arboriculture and Urban Forestry project I was involved with Bryant Scherenbrock, he and I, when he was at the Morton Arboretum, we endeavored into a biochar project on street trees outside of Chicago. So this is also in this issue of Arboriculture and Urban Forestry if you want to do more reading into biochar. But Emma's paper here is a great resource to have an overview of everything we know about biochar and how it relates to our industry and arboriculture. So I mentioned sort of the biochar sort of movement industry, if you will, if we can even call it an industry. I don't know that we can, but there's this group known as the International Biochar Initiative, or the IB, in biochar-international.org. So this is a nonprofit movement that is sort of clearinghouse for all things biochar. And so they are working towards this standardization of characterizing biochar. So if we go to buy a bag of fertilizer, we get a guaranteed analysis on that bag, whether it's 10-10-10 for your garden or 30-08 for the landscape, whatever it is, you can see that guaranteed analysis, see what it's derived from, and make an educated decision. Right? You can, how much fast release nitrogen or water insoluble nitrogen is in that bag. You can make that educated consumer decision. No such thing exists in biochar land, right? You can't pick up a bag of biochar and look at the label and determine if it's a good char or a bad char, or make that educated decision. Well, IBI is working towards this, right? They want to have a consistent system with which we can speak about biochar and characteristics therein, or even what tests we're going to agree on that we're going to use. And then some general feedstock requirements, right? Some basic ground rules around the feedstock of what we're going to make biochar out of. And then these different test categories, right? So what can we agree on the basic level of properties we're going to talk about? How much moisture is there? How much carbon is there? How big are the particles, right? These basics. And then toxin, right? Are there toxins in this that we need to be concerned about? And this could be something as basic as a germination test, right? So that could be the lowest bar that we have to clear, is that certain percentage of seeds still germinate in this biochar, all the way up to testing for specific toxins in it. So this is the idea, so that we can speak a common language and compare chars A, B, and C to one another. And even though we aren't there yet, hopefully by the end of this, you'll know some of the questions to ask. And if a biochar supplier can't answer the questions that you ask, then it's probably giving you the answer that you need to know about the biochar. All right, so as if it wasn't a long enough Tuesday here, I'm going to throw this graphic up, which is super exciting to a group of arborists at nearly 7 o'clock at night. But I think it's a pretty simple one for us to look at. So on the x-axis, this is temperature in Celsius. So we're starting at 200 degrees C all the way up to 900 degrees Celsius. So pretty dang hot. And on this side, the x-axis, we've got the dry weight of the biomass. So 100% dry weight of the biomass is where we start, at 200 degrees C. And as we heat a biomass up, we break chemical bonds and we drive off mass. So this line continues to go down. All right. Over here on the the right x-axis, this is adsorption capacity. And notice this is adsorption, not absorption. So the way I like to think about adsorption is this is the ability for stuff to stick to the biochar particle. And I use the term stuff intentionally because I'm not talking about one specific nutrient ion or a water molecule. I'm stuff, all the nutrients, water molecules, microbial communities in the soil. So we're thinking big picture here on a really small scale. So the higher this adsorption capacity is, and they use a refrigerant as a proxy for that, the higher the adsorption capacity is, that's the greater capacity for this biochar particle to have stuff like nutrients, water, microbial communities set up shop in this biochar particle. Okay. So what we see is that as we heat it up from 2 to 3 to 4 to 500 degrees Celsius, is that we drive off biomass, right? We're breaking chemical bonds, tars, resins, sugars, volatile compounds are being released. And that's where nearly half of that carbon goes in the pyrolysis or charcoal making process. It's through those volatile compounds that are driven off. Well, you look in this 300, 350 degrees C range, this is where our cooking charcoals come from. So if you buy like lump charcoal, like a cowboy charcoal to grill your steak on, this is where most of those are produced, is in this 300 to 400 degrees C range. Because if you continue heating it up, you're not going to have any volatile compounds left, so that when you strike your match to go to grill your steak, you want to leave those in there because they ignite and burn. Right, that you'd be pretty disappointed if you went to light your charcoal and it wouldn't light. So they don't want to break all those bonds and drive off all those volatiles that can ignite and burn. So that's cooking charcoal. And again, this is not Kingsford Matchlight lump charcoal. That's fake. That's not real charcoal. This would be like your cowboy charcoal, your lump hardwood charcoal. All right, so, but we don't want that for biochar, right? So we keep heating it up, keep breaking chemical bonds, driving off those tars, resins, sugars that can burn. And what happens is, if you look at the red line here, this is adsorption capacity. And as we're breaking those bonds, as these volatiles are driven off, that opens up porosity in this char particle. And that's where our adsorption capacity peaks. So most quality biochars are made in this 600-ish Celsius range. And again, it depends on feedstock, depends on the gizmo that it's made in, but around that 605 to 700 degrees C range. That's where our adsorption capacity peaks, and our ability to hang on to stuff is the sweet spot. Okay. So I hope that makes some sense. And then if you think about like activated charcoal, activated carbon, filtration, that's a whole nother thing. It either goes through chemical or steam activation, which puts the absorption capacity on a whole nother scale, because we don't want stuff to stick. We want stuff to stick and stay to filters, right? That's not what we want with biochar. We want stuff, nutrients, water to stick, but then we want it to be given up over time into the soil solution for uptake. All right. I hope that makes some sense. So this is another great graph, really busy. There's one takeaway from this. I want to highlight, there's a group of 3 bars here, all right? And then there's everything else. So the 3 bars on the left, treat those as the same. And then all the other bars, treat those as one. And I want to point you out to the dark green, or it looks like black, maybe resident carbon portion of this vertical graph. That resident carbon, that's the carbon that created the terra preta soils in the Amazon River Basin. The carbon that is sticking around for the long-term centuries will still be in the soil. That's the part of the char particle that we care about. Okay, because if we want this mobile carbon that's going to be here today, gone tomorrow, we can get that through compost or mulch. We want that resident carbon that's going to stick around for our lifetime and beyond. So if you look at wood pellets, wood chips, and this torrefied wood, these are not charred particles. And look how little of that resident carbon is there as a percentage. But if we look at D through S, column D through S, what do we notice is that green section of the bar goes way up, even up to almost 80% of that fixed long-term carbon. But we notice they're not all the same. So again, it's buyer beware market. You have to ask the questions to get the answers, to know where it stacks up here. But again, we can draw the conclusion that any of these charred particles increase that resident long-term carbon component of the biomass. So going back to Emma's paper that was published back in May in Arboriculture and Urban Forestry, four different biochars she looked at: softwood biochar, hardwood biochar, this Namibian acacia biochar, and rice husk biochar. And we just kind of highlighted here in this yellow color some of the drastic differences. I mean, look, between a softwood and a hardwood biochar, we go from a pH of 5.1 to 8.8. Okay, drastic differences. But you know what? You open a bag of them and they both look like charcoal. You're not going to smell the difference. You're not going to taste the difference. You're not going to do any of that. You've got to do the analysis or ask the right questions. Moisture content can be drastically different. And this is why with biochar, we don't even talk about how much biochar in terms of mass, like pounds per 1,000 square feet or pounds per acre, because that's meaningless. It depends on how dry it is, right? If I were an unscrupulous biochar vendor, I'd sell it to you by the pound, and I'd make sure I wet it down before you came to buy it from me. So we talk about in terms of volume, right? A cubic foot is a cubic foot. It doesn't matter if it's wet or dry. So massive differences among just these four biochars. And you can read the table and you can go see Emma's paper if you want to know more. But again, biochars are not all created equal and will not perform the same. And depending on our differing soils, we can have differing effects from the same biochar. So, water holding capacity, again, this porosity of the biochar particle to hang on to water molecules is going to be much more advantageous in more well-drained soils or sandier soils. For those of you closer to the coast, the water holding capacity of biochar could be your greatest effect from the addition of biochar. As we move into non-coastal regions, up into the Piedmont and mountains areas, more fine textured soils, going to be less beneficial from a water holding capacity. However, if we have poorly drained clays, that porosity, those micropore spaces in the biochar particle are going to be the first ones to open up, drain, and aerate as well. CECs, cation exchange capacity, again, typically lower in sandier soils, is going to be less beneficial in clay soils, but these are just massive generalizations, and what we recommend is soil sampling at a minimum to assess what soil texture you have and any side effects. Again, we can have a clay soil, poorly drained soil, where biochar might be beneficial, or the opposite could be true. And this is just an electron micrograph, what the inside of a biochar particle would look like. And you can see all this intercellular space used to be filled with plant biochemicals. All right. But in that heating process, through pyrolysis, in the absence of oxygen, those compounds are broken down and given off. And through the process of breaking down those chemical bonds, heat is given off. So you can warm your hands by a pyrolysis unit, just like you can warm your hands by a fire. But again, with the fire, the resulting product is going to be ash. With pyrolysis, it's going to be charcoal. But this shot right here is why biochar does what it does. It is this massive porosity of these particles. So by opening up all these pore spaces and varying sizes, this is where biochar gets that absorption capacity that we're out for. So a gram of biochar, a good high quality biochar, a gram of biochar is like this maybe teaspoon. So it's not even a palmful. So if you were to take that 1 gram of biochar and unfold that three-dimensional structure into 2 dimensions. So take it and lay it all out on a flat plane. A gram of biochar is going to have the surface area of roughly a tennis court. So if you were to take a tennis court, crumple it up down into the palm of your hand, that's the massive amounts of surface area that a good high quality biochar can have. So pretty amazing stuff when you start to look at it through an electron microscope and see what's going on there. So Brittany, this is the pause before we jump into sort of the tree application side of it. And I'll wrap up in the next 15, 20 minutes or so. Were there any questions I need to circle back to?
So far, I haven't had any. Anybody have any questions? at the moment on anything that Greg's been going over. Oh, bless you.
Yeah, as I took a drink of water and choked myself. Great. All right, we'll keep rolling then.
All right.
Either that means I'm doing a great job or nobody's paying attention. One of the two.
Let's see here.
Either way's fine. Either way's fine. All right, so we'll jump into kind of a few of the studies that are out there on the effects with the tree growth. Did I see a question come in?
Yep. Actually,
yeah, are there biochar suppliers you would recommend? Yeah, there's a couple. One I would recommend is based in Colorado. It's called Biochar Now, NOW. And they take mountain pine beetle killed timber from the Rockies, from the National Forest. And again, taking that waste stream and drought killed pines, and that's their feedstock for producing the biochar. No, excuse me, that's not convenient for Georgia. They do have distribution in the East. And then the other one I would recommend, again, not super convenient to Georgia, but is the Organic Mechanic. It's based in the Philadelphia area in Pennsylvania. Mark Hyland. He does all sorts of soil blends, but he also produces biochar for the horticultural industry. And I think also a little bit closer to home, and some of you may be familiar with some of their products, but Miramichi Green also has biochar as well. So those are the three that come to mind that I would recommend.
Awesome.
Sorry for the cough.
No worries. And just to comment, Joanne, she says she's been using biochar for a couple of years. Joanne, please feel free to share your experiences in the chat.
Cool. Awesome.
Thanks, Kelby.
All right, so let's jump into a few of the studies that are out there. When we first started working with it, we sort of simulated out in our arboretum in Charlotte, planting pit scenarios, and drew some short-term conclusions after only a couple of years, which again, that's super short term. So what we did is we dug uniform sized pits, lined those with geotextile fabric, and then measured some parameters. And after 2 years, no visual differences, no growth differences. We planted Yoshino cherry, but we did start to see some significant differences with some nutrients. It was mainly cat, which again, biochar, that absorption capacity is going to increase the CEC. But where we saw differences was when we blended the biochar application along with fertilizer. Okay, much better than fertilizer alone or biochar alone was the combination of fertilizer and biochar. So over in the UK, they were looking at it at the time of transplant, 2 different varieties of pear, 5 different types of biochar, and again, short term, after 3 years, no difference in visual condition ratings or growth. However, significant differences in water holding capacity in those soils. So again, at the time, though, we were first starting with biochar, we're thinking short term. What are we going to see? What are we going to see? And really, the result is after only a couple of years, not much. And to back that up, this was a study we worked with the city of Vancouver in British Columbia, and we were trying to come up with new ways of getting biochar into trees. And we have this powdered biochar that we mix with water. We call it black lung in a bag. We mix that with water, and we're doing soil injections on Magnolia acuminata. And again, after 2 years, not a whole lot to speak about from a visual or growth standpoint. In this SPAD value, we did increase basically the chlorophyll density in the trees. But again, from a client perspective or a citizen perspective, not a whole lot to hang our hat on here, but we keep trying.
I had a quick question from Stephen. He asked if you had any thoughts on Lesco Carbon Pro G, which is available through Site 1. He said it's about 50% BC by weight, and that's what they use.
Okay, I don't know.
But then I think you said you beat me to it. Let's see here. Yeah, go ahead and answer. Maybe he'll elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that product. Mostly what we see are any of the, and I don't, that Pro G, I'm not sure if that's a granular or a liquid. If it's liquid, most of the time, some of the liquids of biochar in a jug, it's a super low percentage of biochar. If it's a granular, then yeah, it absolutely could have a high percentage of fixed carbon in it. But again, without knowing the more detailed metrics of ash percentage, pH, absorption capacity, it's hard to say, but I don't know the Site One product specifically.
Yeah, I think it looks like you must be doing a great job. You answered the question before he could even finish typing it.
All right,
So
perfect.
doing great.
Put that in the wind. So we kept looking. This is one of the studies we endeavored with in partnership with the Morton Arboretum with Dr. Bryant Sharonbrock, the former soil scientist there in Chicago with street tree pits in a neighborhood in Chicago, where we were looking at biochar alone, fertilizer alone, combination of biochar and fertilizer versus control. And what we found was that just biochar alone or just fertilizer alone with a whole suite of growth and performance metrics, they were no different than the control, right? But when we combined biochar and fertilizer, that's where the magic happened. And this Brian and I published this several years ago, so it's out there in the press if you want to read about it. And then again, over in the UK, looking at tree planting studies in municipalities there, again, screening 5 different types of biochar. Visual ratings were improved with 3 of the types of biochar, but the hardwood biochar, when we started evaluating wine, looking at root growth, it actually had the least amount of fine root growth, which leads us into efficiency of root systems. And that's kind of where my passion is, that we focus as a society, or as in arboriculture, as more roots must be better. We have to promote roots, but this sort of echoes back to what I've learned over the years, that more roots doesn't mean better. That if we can create an efficient soil system for root performance and root uptake, that the tree will actually produce less roots because it doesn't need more roots. It can allocate that carbon to other things above ground. So this was interesting. So now we're starting to learn more about the combination of nutrient supplies with biochar and how to best manage this over time. And I won't bore you with that crap. So then we started thinking, all right, well, if we apply biochar alone and we know we need to combine it with a nutrient source, a fertilizer, or some other nutrient source, could be a compost. Does it matter if we apply them separately at the time of application, or should we pre-soak them to sort of charge that biochar particle with the good goodies? So we started to ask those questions. So in this study, it was biochar alone, biochar combined with our fertilizer, phosphites that we rely on, like potassium phosphite, Reliant, things of that sort. Do we pre-soak those? Do we apply them at the time of application? And really what we found out was this was an initial potted trial. It really didn't matter when we did it, if we did it at the site of application or ahead of time. So just, again, these are massive overviews of a lot of studies, but we were able to draw some conclusions based on these studies and some others. And Brittany, I don't know if there's a question, but I'll come to it after this slide, if that's all right.
Okay. Yep.
Is that with biochar alone, if we just apply the biochar itself, there's not a whole lot to be gained in the short term. It is just a raw charcoal particle with all that open spore space that's ready to do stuff, right? It's ready to hang on to water. It's ready to hang on to nutrients. It's ready to host microbial communities in it. But in and of itself, it doesn't really have any fertility. And unless we soak it down with water, it doesn't really have any moisture content, certainly void of any microbial activity after being heated to 600 degrees Celsius. So one thing we do know is that we do have to blend it with something, right? Compost, fertilizer, and compost to sort of activate that charcoal to quench its hunger. All right, because it's hungry, it's ready to gobble stuff up. So we need to quench that hunger at the time of application. And again, that could be with fertilizer, that could be with compost, could be with water, and that combination far outperforms just fertilizer or just compost alone. But again, these are all short-term studies, and even though we've been looking at it for 10 years, we had a couple of 2-year studies or 1-year studies or 3-year studies where we're able to draw some conclusions and then set up longer term studies that are still cooking today, right? In order to do long-term studies, you need longer terms to draw conclusions. And that's kind of where we are now. And this whole charging it with different things, microbial communities that we know are beneficial and antagonize some of our pathogens like verticillium or armillaria or phytophthora. What if we could seed those antagonistic organisms into this biochar particle? That's kind of the things that we're thinking now. So Brittany, what was the question?
Yeah. So first of all, there was a lot of chatter happening in the Q&A. So I've got a couple of questions that I'm going to ask you. If I've missed somebody, let me know. It was kind of hard to distinguish what was chatter versus questions. Benjamin, he says, is this uninoculated biochar being added? Is applying fertilizer with the biochar the same as inoculation?
Yeah, so in these studies, no. As far as microbial communities or anything along those lines, no. We were not inoculating with anything specific. However, in a lot of the studies that we and others have done, the biochar is being blended with compost, which we know is full of microbial communities, mostly good, some bad, but we don't know exactly which communities were there. And I don't want to get off too far on this tangent, but what we do know from a lot of work that others have published is that, soils, even in the urban environment where we consider them void of microbial activity, are full of microbial microbes, and many of them are beneficial. So we think about supplementing mycorrhizae, and numerous studies have showed that even in our crummy urban soils, there's plenty of mycorrhizal inoculant potential in those soils. We just have to provide the right environment. So that was a long-winded answer to say in these studies, they were not intentionally inoculated with any beneficial microbe. They were there, they weren't quantified though.
Awesome. Thank you. Let me know if you have any further questions on that. Timothy wants to know, any guess on the time frame for industry standardization for analysis?
Yeah. No, I don't have a guess. I mean, it's been talked about for quite a while. They are to the point where they can close to agreeing on the standard tests, right? So at least that'd be great, because then we can speak a common language about what the test results are, as opposed to, well, I tested with this method, you tested with that method. What does it all mean? Who knows? So that's really close.
Okay.
That's the good news.
Okay, just two more for you. JW wants to know, are there any studies that have been done that you have done on the less roots may not be a bad thing?
Yeah, actually, if you look, arboriculture and urban forestry, can't remember the issue, it was 2011. We published a paper, and this was based on my Ph.D. work at Clemson in arboriculture and urban forestry on that topic. But that's what actually is not well known or thought through in our world in arboriculture. But in orchards and fruit tree production, that's a well-known phenomenon, that if you supplement the orchard trees, they're going to divert resources away from root growth and into shoot, or in their case, fruit production. So it's almost like spoon feeding the tree. Why would it produce roots when you're bringing the buffet to it instead of having to go out and forage? So for arboriculture, it's a kind of a different thought process, but in agriculture and fruit production, it's a well-established phenomenon.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. You have a lot of questions coming up. Do you want me to continue, or do you want it to?
Well, I tell you what, if you don't mind, I'll keep rolling, because we're going to get to the more exciting stuff here. And I realize I only have 14 minutes left.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, if you don't mind, guys, I'm going to hold. You guys have so many awesome questions, but we'll hold those until he finishes up, just so that those who have to go can go, and then we can carry on with questions.
All right. And I'll kind of skip through, like, we don't have arid climates in the southeast, so we'll skip over the water content part. But it's where it gets exciting, is the effects on the stress of the tree, right? And so this kind of goes back to that whole microbial community, good guy, bad guy thing. So we all can agree mycorrhizal fungi are beneficial, whether they occur naturally or we augment their population. So that we can agree on. So this paper, again, from Johannes Lehmann, is out there looking specifically at the effects on biochar and the entire soil biota beyond just mycorrhizae. But the short version, the short conclusion is that biochar amendments consistently across many of the studies that are out there that Dr. Lehmann reviewed in this paper, is that the addition of biochar did increase the mycorrhizal colonization of roots, that partnership between root and mycorrhizal fungus, which in turn will reduce root growth, because the mycorrhizae is taking the place of roots. The trees produce less roots because the mycorrhizal fungi are doing that work on behalf of the tree. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, and again, there's several papers that dig into this. A couple of years ago in this phytopathology review, looking at how biochar can be a component in plant pathogen management. And this is pretty exciting. This is the kind of information that's in there. It breaks down what we know about different groups of pathogens, whether or not biochar has an effect on that pathogen and what mechanism. And then they reference the original literature and cite that. So if you're interested in tracking more of that down, that'd be awesome. But this paper right here on pepper and tomato by this group out of Israel back in 2010 is the one that really started to change our world. So this is that paper, and it left us with the question of can biochar induce the systemic resistance response in the plant? So a quick circle back to what that paper was about was they had greenhouse tomatoes and peppers, and they had above ground pathogens, botrytis and powdery mildew, which had no part of their life cycle in the soil. But by having biochar in the soil, those two above ground foliar pathogens were reduced. So biochar somehow is triggering this induced resistance response in the plant. So, something we all battle is Phytophthora, right? Phytophthora root rot specifically. And we know that microbial communities in the soil antagonize Phytophthora. And one of the best things we can do for Phytophthora management is mulch, right? To stimulate that microbial community that degrades Phytophthora. So we started with some plots. Again, this was around 2009, 2010, 11, where we inoculated with Phytophthora, but had these various amendments of no amendment, biochar, and compost, that blend. And then we planted Phytophthora magnets, and gardenia. And it's just a photo of the response we saw. Here in the foreground, these were the gardenia on the left and the vinca on the right. And you can tell, like, these are not thrifty looking plants. They're chlorotic, the vinca's wilting. And then look at the plot behind them with the biochar amendment and how much better these plants look. And across the plot, you could pick them out, right? No amendment. And then the biochar and compost was like the Cadillac treatment. And we said, okay, there might be something here, right? So maybe these tomatoes and peppers were not a fluke. So let's take it over to trees and see how they performed. And basically in this study, we did everything wrong, right? We added Phytophthora to the soil. We overwatered them in a heavy clay soil. We had Phytophthora magnet species, but it stimulated the question of what's going on here. Why are these plants performing so much better with biochar in the soil? So at the time, Drew's work was in our diagnostic lab. So Drew went out to the University of Washington to get his PhD and answer that question. So we took similar methodology to red oak and red maple seedlings, and we did stem inoculations with Phytophthora canker. Okay, so this is not soil-borne Phytophthora. This is distinct Phytophthora cankers. So again, there's that disconnect between the life cycle of the disease organism and biochar in the soil. There is no part of this disease cycle that occurs in the soil. This is Phytophthora canker. And we looked at various rates of biochar in the soil and compared that to potassium phosphite, which is the industry standard product treatment regime. So Drew took all sorts of physiological data every week, and we measured water potential on these plants to see how much water stress they were under. And this is what the cankers look like, right? So I hope it's showing up on your screen, but this was the inoculation point, and you can see the discoloration in this seedling and the canker, the darkening of that canker. So we measured the expansion vertically of that canker, right? So there was the inoculation site. How far did that canker move vertically? But probably more importantly is radially. How far and fast did that canker move? Because that radial distribution is what's going to girdle the tree, cut off water and nutrient flow up to the tree. So, you see the canker there on the oak. We had no effect on the dry biomass, no effect on the vertical lesion. But when it came to stem girdling, again, that radial movement, this 5% rate of biochar significantly reduced the girdling, which is pretty fantastic. And then the 5% biochar treatment also, these trees were under less water stress as well. With the maples, our chemical control was far and away the best, but we don't want to rely on chemical control. We want to look at cultural procedures that can help be part of the program. So if you want to read more about Drew's work here, you can pick up Hort Science. I think this was 2013. 15. Hort Science 47, and biochar amendment increases resistance to Phytophthora stem lesions, basically. So this graph here is kind of the take-home message. So this was the expansion of the lesions in maple, and this is percent stem circumference girdled. So 100% of that stem circumference girdle means from the inoculation site, it spread radially around the tree, 100% touched on the backside. So that tree is girdled at that point. It's like taking a chainsaw and girdling it. So no biochar, but inoculated. You can see those trees were about 80% girdled by the Phytophthora canker. And this is the 5% by volume biochar rate. So it cut the stem circumference essentially in half. So it went from 80% girdle to 40% girdle. But look, 10%, twice as much biochar, actually performed worse. And then 20% biochar was even worse than control. So again, we're kind of dialing into this 5% by volume sweet spot. I've skipped over a lot of papers and studies to get us to that point. This confirmed 5% is our sweet spot. And then this chemical treatment over here, this potassium phosphite, things like Reliant, Agrifos, the industry standard at about 5-10% girdling. So again, we're not there, but from a cultural standpoint, we're triggering that same defense mechanism response with biochar in the soil and managing a stem canker disease. I won't bog you down with all this. This is physiological data. So carbon assimilation. And again, the 5% biochar treatment right here from a carbon assimilation standpoint was very similar to our chemical control. This was the inoculated control. So these plants were suffering. And this was the uninoculated control. So never received Phytophthora treatment. So you can see the 5% biochar carbon assimilation was very, very similar. No statistical difference between that and the chemical control. So physiologically, we know it's doing something. So just to wrap all this up, again, it's not a cure-all. It's going to depend on the site. It's going to depend on the biochar. A lot of factors there. One thing we do know is that top dressing just on the soil surface doesn't have the effect of incorporating it into the root system, either at planting or post-planting. 5% by volume is what we and everybody else in woody plant system research has found to be the consistent sweet spot. It may not always be, right? Certain species, certain soil conditions, but 5% by volume is our consistently best performing across the board rate. And then all these variables with water and nutrient retention, microbial communities, right? We just got the tip of the iceberg of what's going on there, but it's likely the confluence of all these factors working together, the reason we see the benefits. And then again, we have other ways of supplying short-term organic matter, compost and mulch, much easier, much more available, cheaper, easier to get supply of. Those are only going to give us those short-term benefits. What we're in this for is the long-term play of biochar, which is going to take time for us to answer. But that's sort of the conclusion that I have. So I'll stop the screen share here and turn it back over to you, Brittany, at this point, and see if we can get through a couple questions in the last 3 or so minutes.
All right. Well, of course, I went ahead and dropped that CEU sign-in sheet for any of you that have to dart at 7:30. Thank you so much. It seems like you sparked a lot of questions. So first, we've got one from Stephen. Will the biochar extend the length of time the fertilizer will last?
Yeah, it absolutely could, depending again on your fertilizer formulation. If you already have a controlled release, timed release, water insoluble nitrogen formulation, that's already taken care of. But certainly with faster, more soluble formulations, it absolutely can do that. It can again adsorb, so temporarily have those ions stick to the biochar particles and then slowly give those up into the soil solution over time, especially in sandier soils with lower CECs to begin with.
Okay, awesome. Also from Benjamin, any best management practices for applying biochar to established or newly planted trees? Vertical mulching question.
Yeah, I mean, vertical mulching can work. I don't know if you caught it, but in the street tree pits in Chicago, that's what we did because we had cars on one side and storefronts on the other. Our typical preferred method is to use something like the air spade and incorporate it that way. We get a better distribution, decompaction, a lot of other benefits of doing it that way. Vertical mulching can work. We've seen that work. It just typically wouldn't be our preferred method. Vertical mulching, radial trenching, that's a method. I see other companies do it. Our typical go-to is using an air tool, just from a distribution standpoint.
Okay, Awesome. Awesome. Benjamin, let me know if you have any further questions on that. Jeff wants to know, is there a difference in results between tilling in biochar more intensively versus top dress applications?
Yeah, one thing we know is short term, at least, top dressing is not going to give you the benefit, because like where we top dress mulch or even a compost, it's more actively degraded by microorganisms. Even things like earthworms are going to move it down into the soil profile. That is not the case with biochar. Again, it's permanent. It's not being actively degraded or moved into that upper soil profile by critters, right? Earthworms, insects, microbial communities. It's going to lay on the soil surface for quite a while. So, and again, at the Morton Arboretum, Bryant Sharonbrock did some of that work, and same thing. We did some benefits from the soil surface application, but nowhere near to what they are with incorporation.
Awesome. Thank you. Denny wants to know, could you charge BC with compost tea under vacuum?
You could. Yeah, I'm personally not a big fan of the compost tea inoculation method. I think there's some better ways we can go about inoculating it. And again, I keep throwing his name out there, but Brian Sharonbach published, I can't remember what year it was, on compost tea versus compost, and orders of magnitude more populations of categories of microorganisms in the compost as opposed to the compost tea. So we're talking 100,000-fold more. So that's kind of our approach, is why blend it with compost tea when we can blend it with the compost and get orders of magnitude more organisms. But you could charge them.
Awesome. Thank you. JW wants to know, if planting a 2-inch BMBD tree, what would the 5% biochar amount look like?
So you kind of have to think about your root zone, which if you're transplanting a 2-inch BMB, what's your root zone, right? Well, it's whatever's in that ball today. But then what do you expect that root zone to be in a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years? How far out do you want to go? So I would say typically, in the short term, 2-3 year time frame, looking at establishment, I would take maybe 2 times diameter of the root ball and take the surface area, whatever 2-dimensional surface area that is. And if you want to incorporate it a foot deep, then that's how many cubic feet you have to work with. If you want to go 6 inches deep, you multiply it by 0.5, half a foot, and that's how many cubic feet you have to work with, and then add 5% of that. So let's just, for the easy math, you have 100 cubic feet of soil volume you're considering the root zone, then you're going to add 5 cubic feet of biochar and incorporate it in that area.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see here. All right. What is the recommended method of, this is from Michelle, recommended method of incorporating into soil of mature trees?
Yeah, that's where we heavily rely on the air spade or soil pick or air knife, or choose your weapon, but an air excavation tool, so that we can cultivate and incorporate the biochar while minimizing or reducing or eliminating root damage. Again, you could do radial trenching, you could do vertical mulching, but then you're just creating these pockets of biochar as opposed to a more homogenized soil mix. So that's our typical way of doing it. And that's a great way to incorporate compost as part of that blend with the biochar.
Okay, I do have a couple that are kind of follow up, kind of along the same lines. So Benjamin, are you okay for just a couple more minutes to answer a couple questions? Okay, Benjamin had a follow-up question from earlier. So radial trenching with an air spade and knife and dropping biochar and compost amendment into trenches is what you were suggesting earlier. That's what you were suggesting earlier to his question about best management practices.
I would call that a management practice. I wouldn't call it the best management practice, because again, with air spading radial trenches or air spading holes for vertical mulching, we're limiting that root response to that trench or to that hole. Whereas if we can use the air spade to disrupt the critical root zone area, so let's say 3 to 5 times diameter around the trunk of that tree, it's a much larger volume of soil that we are decompacting and amending. And instead of creating these pockets of advantageous soil, it's a more homogeneous area. And that's where we see more benefit, whether it's a trench or whether it's a hole with vertical mulching. And this all goes back to work Gary Watson at the Morton Arboretum did in I think it was the 90s, early 2000s, where roots are opportunistic. they're going to concentrate around these pockets, whether they be circles or trenches, as opposed to how they perform in larger volumes of amended soil. We would much prefer to have these larger, more homogeneous, improved soils as opposed to these pockets, isolated pockets in trenches or holes.
Okay. Thank you. Timothy, this is kind of more going on that mature tree question from Rochelle earlier. He's got a two-part. Do you recommend any water-based soil injection to achieve the 5% for mature trees, maybe with air soil fracturing?
Yeah, using any sort of water-based biochar, whether that be in a jug or we mix powder with water, is really hard to get to the 5% by volume quickly. It takes a long time. Even like this big, thick, slurry, almost paste, like as highly concentrated as you can make it, it takes a while to get to that magic number. The other thing you have to know is the absorption capacity and surface area of if you're using a powdered biochar versus a chip, because it's obviously less pore space because it's a bunch of fine particles. And so what we find in the powdered biochar we use is the equivalent surface area to get to 5% that we would get to with our chip product. We only need half of that, so 2.5% by volume with the powdered product. So these are things that you have to know to even know what your target is to shoot at. So it's hard to say, but if you're looking at something like the air tech tool that's going to push a slurry into the air fractures, that's certainly going to help. But again, not knowing the surface area and what our target should be, it's going to be hard to answer that. But it takes a while when you start mixing it with liquid. It takes a while, a number of applications to get there.
Okay. I will say it looks like I'm having several requests to have you back to go in more detail. Some more time with us. So
okay. All right.
Everybody is very, very happy and wants to learn more. So Cassie wants to know any companies I could purchase biochar totes from in Hawaii or from the West Coast. She's purchased several times through Pacific Biochar and have a really hard time sourcing product right now.
Yeah, so there's Pacific Biochar, and then there's, is it Hawaii Biochar, Hawaii, Josiah, Google the name Josiah Hunt, and he's from Hawaii and one of the pioneers in biochar usage. So I'm not quite sure where Josiah is now as far as his company is concerned, but track him down, and yeah, Pacific Biochar was going to be one that I recommended as well. So
okay,
you need a field trip to Hawaii to answer that one.
That sounds like a fun field trip. Any of us will be willing to take on. Any other questions? Let's see here. Yep, Josiah was her contact.
Okay.
Come to Maui. Okay, we're coming.
Let's go. Yeah.
Awesome. Anybody else? I will say this has been the most questions I've gotten. I've only been around for 7 months now, and you have a very interesting topic. Everybody wants to learn more. So
excellent. Awesome. All right.
Well, thank you so much, Kelby, for spending your Tuesday night with us. We hope you'll join us again one day in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Always happy. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Right.
I'm going to stick around, everybody, just to make sure everybody gets the sign-in sheet. Doesn't need anything from me. But okay. Kelby, you have a wonderful evening. And
all right. Thanks, and go dogs. Yeah.
Thank you again. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.